Here's part 7 of our chapter 2 video lecture where we're going to have an overview of calculating the child tax credit and a similar credit called other dependent relative credit. So if you remember when we were working with the 1040 form, there was a section called dependents, and we were checking off a box here whether that dependent is a qualifying child. A qualifying child for this credit is a child under age 17. Typically, a qualifying child is under age 19 or under age 24 as a full-time student. But this type of credit, the child has to be under age 17. And then if you do check off this box, that probably means the taxpayer can claim a $2,000 credit. Now, if the dependent isn't a qualifying child under age 17, then possibly that dependent, you can check off this box here, and they'll give the taxpayer a $500 credit. The credits here are quite common on tax returns, so we have a specific line here on the 1040 form. That's this line 13A. If you remember, the less common non-refundable credits were reported and grouped on Schedule 3. But here again, we have a separate line for child tax credit and credit for other dependents. And before we enter the amount here in line 13A, we got to calculate the amount on a worksheet that's on the instructions for the 1040 form on beginning on page 35. Again, qualifying children have to be under age 17. So if they're 17 in the current year, that means they're not a qualifying child. You have to use them as a other relative. So here in line 1, we will enter the number of children that would qualify under age 17 and multiply it by $2,000. And then in the next line, line 2, all the other dependents will give you a $500 credit each. So you totaled up the two categories, and here's the tentative maximum credit you can claim. But there's an income limitation. And for most taxpayers, it's not a problem because they make less than $400,000 for married filing joint or under $200,000 for other filing statuses. So basically, there's no phase out of the credit, and we would rewrite the same credit down here. But if you remember, non-refundable credits are used up in a specific order. Here in line 9 of the worksheet, we would enter the total tax liability for the year coming from line 12B of the 1040. And then if you remember on Schedule 3, there was a list of credits. Like here in line 1 would be the foreign tax credit. Line 2 would be the child independent care credit. One of these here was the education credit. So those are used up first before using up this child tax credit and other credit for other dependents. So it kind of figures out here if there's any tax liability after using up those other credits. And only then can you use this credit, okay, this credit, which we're told to put in line 13A that we saw back on the 1040 form. And here's a hint saying maybe you should be looking at also this schedule called 8812, because if you cannot use up all of your child tax credit, possibly you can convert it to something called additional child tax credit that's a refundable type versus the non-refundable we've just calculated here. So let's take a look at that 8812 schedule, where we would enter all of that child tax credit and credit for other dependents and subtract out the amount here in line 2 that we've used up as non-refundable to give us any excess. But the amount of the excess that you can carry over now to this additional child tax credit is up to a maximum of $1,400 per qualifying child. Again, none of that other 500 credit will be utilized or converted to refundable. So we multiply this out and we compare the two, and the lower of the two would be the tentative amount that we can use as a credit. Again, there's going to be a limitation based upon income, but not a high income. We're looking for just earning income to be able to generate the credit. Your so-called earn or work income would be entered here, and you have to have more than $2,500 of that earned income. Otherwise, you're not going to have any of that additional child tax credit. So any earned income in excess of 2,500, we would multiply it by 15%, and we would compare that excess of 15% with any unused credit, and then that's going to be the additional child tax credit you would enter way down here. Okay, and I'll show you where you put it on the 1040 form. Now, if you have 3 or more qualifying children, there's an additional calculation you have to go through, but we'll skip that. So let's take a look back at the 1040 form. And again, was the non-refundable part of the child tax credit and credit for other dependent relatives. The refundable part of the additional child tax credit goes over here in line 18B. And just like taxes you've already paid through withholding, if you have any excess here, you get it back as a refund. Whereas if you have any excess of these credits up here, including on Schedule 3, you don't get it back as a refund. Okay, let's stop here, and when we come back to the next video, let's talk about another common refundable credit called the Earned Income Credit, EIC.